The Miami Dolphins 2023 Prospect Spotlight Series continues at the tight end position with South Dakota State tight end Tucker Kraft, who he is, how he'd fit the Dolphins roster, and where the team should consider drafting him at the end of April.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Dolphins fans? Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins, your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I am your host, Kyle Krabs, lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, your host here of Locked On Dolphins, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, this team building podcast dedicated to all 32 teams across the NFL. Welcome to Locked On Dolphins. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Dolphins your first Miami Dolphins listen of the day. We got a couple shows coming your way here today, starting first and foremost with South Dakota State tight end Tucker Kraft as the seventh tight end that we have done in this Prospect Spotlight series. We are grading 10 in total, and we might get a couple more on the back end of this series, but we got to start shifting gears. You, the people, have spoken on social media, on Twitter at Locked On Fins, and we're going to be going to the offensive tackle position next on the Prospect Spotlight Series. So looking forward to just kicking one spot down inside, looking at tackles for the Dolphins as day two candidates, and not quite as robust of a selection as the tight end group. This is a really deep day two tight end class, and Tucker Kraft is certainly a very strong candidate to have his name called for the Dolphins. So let's go ahead and do the deep dive. We're going to start with who he is, and then we're going to talk about how he'd fit the Dolphins, and then we're going to finish with where he would stack amongst the tight ends we've covered and when the Dolphins should consider adding him to the roster if it were to play out that way at the end of April. So here's what you need to know about Tucker Kraft. From an athletic profile perspective, this is one of the more well-rounded tight ends in this year's class. He is 6'0", This is numbers according to the NFL Combine. So 6'0", is 6 foot 5 inches and 0.8 of an inch. So 6'5" on the nose. 254 pounds, 32 3/4 inches on his arm length. He has 10-inch hands across from tip of thumb to tip of pinky. He ran a 4.69 in the 40-yard dash with a 1.59 second 10-yard split, a 34-inch vertical jump, a 10'2" standing broad jump, a 7.08 second three-cone drill, a 4.29 second short shuttle drill, and 23 bench press reps. Here's the thing that's really impressive about the athletic profile of Tucker Kraft as a player. He is above the 50th percentile in everything other than his arm length, which is 38th percentile. But if you look at his athletic testing, 84th percentile for the 10-yard split, 71st percentile for the 40-yard dash, 62nd percentile for the vertical jump, 86th percentile in the standing broad jump, 64th percentile in his three-cone drill, 69th percentile in his short shuttle, and 75th percentile for the bench press. Like he's a top third tester at every combine measure imaginable at the tight end position since like 2000. Well-rounded. And this is for a guy who's coming out of South Dakota State. Played for the Jackrabbits, who won the FCS championship this past year. Here's what you need to know. He's from Timber Lake High School in South Dakota. So he was born, raised South Dakota. He's a junior, redshirt junior. He redshirted his true freshman season in 2019. At Timber Lake High School, he primarily played running back, linebacker, and punter. Rushed for 1,400 yards and 24 touchdowns as a senior. Was a 4-year starter at the high school level, scored 50 touchdowns offensively. Saw limited action at quarterback through 5 touchdown passes in high school as well. Was also all-state in basketball, averaging 14 and 8. That is a heck of an athletic pedigree coming out of South Dakota. From a production standpoint, the last 2 years have really been the breakout for Tucker Kraft. He caught 7 passes in his first 2 seasons at South Dakota State. He finished his career with 99 receptions for 1,211 yards and 9 touchdowns. He missed about 2 months this year with some injuries, but did come back and played late in the year. So he was back into fitness to be able to play. His best season was 2021, in which he posted 65 receptions for 773 yards and 6 scores. So this is a player who dominated when he was healthy the last 2 seasons of FCS. Did not play tight end until he got to South Dakota State. So just like some of these other guys that we're mentioning, the Laportas as a wide receiver, Dalton Kincaid, who only played 1 year of high school football, period. There's a developmental tap in here that makes for a really nice sales pitch for what this player can be transposed to what he currently is, because you kind of get the sense he's just scratching the surface. Tucker Kraft, when I think about level of competition, and this is kind of an important note here with Tucker Kraft, because we're talking about holding him up against guys from the Pac-12 powerhouse that is Utah. The Iowa Hawkeyes is a tight end offensive line and tight end factory. You're thinking about holding him up against Notre Dame, the blue blood program with Michael Mayer, and the 2-time reigning national champion Georgia Bulldogs with Darnell Washington, right? Like, these are some of the most successful programs and pedigrees that you can have. And then you have South Dakota State. Well, I'll say this about South Dakota State as well. They have very quickly surpassed North Dakota State as the FCS powerhouse. So this is not a program to thumb your nose at. Remember, this is the same conference that put out Carson Wentz and Christian Watson in the last couple of years. Both of those guys were North Dakota State guys. Cody Mauch this year is a day 2 selection on the offensive line. Like, there's talent in the Missouri Valley Conference. There's no question about that. The question is, where is Tucker Kraft ready to assimilate to the NFL game versus where does he need time? Because this is that position. The tight end position in general, guys usually take a little bit of time. Their first year is not their most rousing, successful year. And I think Tucker Kraft is a player that's a tale of 2 outcomes and 2 paths that he's going to have to take, because there's 2 different things that you have to do as a player in the NFL. You have to be a receiver and you have to be a blocker. We're going to talk about who he is in that regard here in just a minute on the show. But before we do, have to tell you about our friends over at Built. Built March Madness is here. The Built March Madness bracket is getting ready to come to a close. So you have to strike now while the iron is hot. Everybody has a favorite bar puff, but now is the time to make it count. 50 lucky Locked On listeners will visit BuiltMarchMadness.com and vote for their favorite and be entered into a drawing and win a free box of Built for their participation in Built March Madness. Not only that, one lucky Locked On listener will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars and puffs delivered directly to your door. You have to try Built. It is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. It's high in protein, high in fiber, low in calories, low in sugar. It's the life hack you didn't know you needed. They're absolutely positively delicious. They're like eating candy bars. So visit Built March Madness right now to vote on your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March. So today is it. It's the last day of Built March Madness. Time to make it count. Swing on through and get yourself a box while you're there. Tucker Kraft is, as far as I'm concerned, fairly pro-ready as a receiving tight end. You can see some really likable elements to his game with the ball skills, with the catch radius, with the physicality that he provides. He's not afraid of contact. He wins through contact. He wins with bodies draped over his frame. He's got good concentration. He runs sufficient routes. I don't think he's a man separator. although he can probably continue to build up on longer developing routes and use his size and length and strength to bump defenders and create more room for himself and grow in that capacity. But Tucker Kraft, in my mind, shows a lot of very easily translatable skills to being a pass catcher early in his NFL career. I cannot say the same for his ability as a blocker. And that is the ultimate conflict that I have with Tucker Kraft. I will say this too. If I were back at Draft Network and I were grading Tucker Kraft for all 32 teams, he would have graded higher than where I graded him specifically on a scale for the Dolphins. Because when you cross-reference the opportunity that exists in the Dolphins offense, you cross-reference what the needs are in that position room and what the needs are for this team to get better offensively and definitively get better offensively. Adding a more traditional receiving tight end who is still a receiving tight end is a step in the right direction for having a more proportionate player at the tight end position as compared to Mike Gesicki. But it is not a step closer in year one to being a better offense. And here's the thing, like Tucker Kraft, with his build, with his athleticism, with his stature, with his strength, he has everything he needs to develop into an impactful player in all phases. And if I were to give you the 3-year projection for these players, Tucker Kraft is probably second or third on this list. Third or fourth on this list amongst these tight ends. But I'm not drafting you as a Dolphins team that's in a win-now mentality who needs an apparent upgrade at the position for year 3. I'm drafting you for what you can bring sooner rather than later. And that is not an easy negotiation to have. If I weren't putting center of gravity and inline skills and pass protection as meaningful traits at the tight end position, Tucker Kraft would be graded right up there with Laporta. But I am. And you watch Tucker Kraft and the skills and the body posture and the fundamentals of blocking that defensive end from Northern Iowa who's 6'7" and you can easily leverage is not the task you're going to have when you get to the NFL level. I have very little concern because I'm watching him make contested catches already, and I'm watching him make catches in traffic and use his body to shield the football in the middle of the field as a receiver in between zones. That is a direct translation of what he's going to do at the NFL level, and he's ready for that because he showcased he is very skilled at it. And he's pretty darn good after the catch for 255 pounds, too. They ran some short, like, little middle screens for Tucker Kraft and busted big plays with him with the ball in his hands. They ran a couple end-arounds with Tucker Kraft where he would go in split flow motion or slice motion at the snap, and they'd just touch pass it to him, and he'd go out around the end, and they'd be running to get first downs on the perimeter with Tucker Kraft. As a skill player, he is ready. As a blocker, I think there's some growth that's necessary. I think from a body posture, center of gravity, lower body recruitment, hand placement consistency, he shows great effort. Patience is another area, I think, for growth when he's blocking in space and he's eager to close that gap and get down on bodies. There's just a lot of high variance reps as a blocker at the FCS level. Well, that's the area that usually trips up a tight end when they transition to the pro game in general. So that's where I get stuck with Tucker Kraft. I think from a run after catch and a size perspective, he brings plenty that this Dolphins offense would benefit from. I hold him up as a route runner. I don't think he's the route running defeat man coverage player that Dalton Kincaid is. I think he's He's a touch less dynamic than both Kincaid and Sam Laporta. So he's pretty tightly graded with Michael Mayer. And Mayer does end up getting a little bump over him in the positional rankings just for the fact that I think Mayer has more translatable inline skills in spite of the length, but Kraft has a higher ceiling. So it's a ceiling versus, it's a year one versus year three conversation for Tucker Kraft that if you're willing to pay the price in the terms of time that it takes, I think he's going to be a better player long term. I don't know and can't speak confidently to how the Dolphins would negotiate a long-term play versus an immediate dividends, especially when the area that they need the most help at the position is the element of his game that I have the most concerns with. So it's a very unique study as far as fitting. I think he's a long-term fit. I don't know that he's the best immediate value or ROI. So how would they negotiate that and how would they value that? I'm glad you asked. That is what we are finishing here with today on the show. But before we get there, the NCAA tournament is at the Final Four, and there's no better time to get into the action than now with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now FanDuel is giving customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. And then you can wager on everything from the money line to point scores and three score and who's cutting down the net and anything and everything in between. All on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. So do not miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. So here's kind of where I'm at with evaluating. We've evaluated Tucker Kraft, and now it's time to value Tucker Kraft. I think when we get to the end of this process, I'm going to be able to hold up all the tight ends and say, this is the pick in which I would draft these players. I would trade up for Darnell Washington. I would draft Dalton Kincaid or Sam Laporta at 51. I would probably consider Michael Mayer at 51 if he was the best available. Yes, I would. I would consider Michael Mayer as well. I'd put him in that bucket. Tucker Kraft, because he's not immediately addressing the primary element of the position room that needs to be improved, I don't think I would pound the table for him at 51. Would I be mad if he was the pick at 51? No, because it's a long-term play. But they made two long-term plays with their first two picks last year in Channing Tindall and Eric Ezukama. And both of them needed a year to incubate. Do I think Tucker Kraft needs a year to incubate? No, I think he can give you certain things, but he's not going to be the panacea that fixes everything that you have in the room, which means you're going to have to get into June and July, and you're going to have to sign somebody on a one-year deal or a short-term deal to help further bridge the gap. And that's okay. They'll have the room with the post-June 1 money. They can do it. But if the addition spurs another transaction for the short term, then in my mind, this is a player that's better targeted late with the second of your two picks. So in my mind, Tucker Kraft is a target for 84. If you get to 51 and there's a bunch of stuff that's too good to be true that's on the board at other positions, or if all the tight ends that you would take in front of Tucker Kraft in the positional rankings are out of the way, and Tucker Kraft is the best available, I would probably say, well, let's see if we can get him at 51 or at 84. And if we can't, then we can come back and we have a couple other tight ends that we need to cover and grade. Or potentially Brenton Strange is your in case of emergency break glass player at 84, or you trade down a little bit to get to him. So that's kind of my mentality with Tucker Kraft, is because I don't have a definitive grasp on how he's going to improve the the Dolphins' biggest area of concern, he is tiered separately from the guys who I think can come in and have a little bit more of a definitive floor at that element of the position. Now, if John Embry falls in love with the guy, then so be it. You know, I don't want you to walk away from the Tucker Kraft profile and say that you'd be disappointed if he was the pick at 51, because I like Tucker Kraft. And as I said earlier, if I were evaluating him across all 32 teams and the traits that I was evaluating was a little bit more vague, he would be graded in the Sam Laporta range, where you'd be very comfortable with this player as a potential top 50 pick. The question is, across the other 31 teams in the league, how many of them need a tight end? How many of them between 51 and 84 will have not already addressed the position and will have deemed that he's the best player available? That's the game of the draft in general. And that's part of why I've loved the draft and the gamesmanship and the strategy and the evaluation that's involved from all parties and all 32 teams. This is a good football player. Strong hands, strong after the catch. He bullies defenders with the ball in his hands. He's got excellent concentration. He's got a highlight reel, catch reel that you definitely know is going to translate. It's just a question of how long do you have to wait to see the best version of Tucker Kraft in the NFL? And perhaps the best, let me go ahead and I'll leave you guys with this. Perhaps the best example that we can point to is he's not as dynamic as this player, but he went to the same school. He had the almost identical statures. Dallas Goedert, year one, 16 games played, 8 games started for the Philadelphia Eagles in 2018. He was targeted 44 times, caught 33 passes for 344 yards and 4 touchdowns. Was generally not a strong contributor in non-passing game situations because he needed to grow as a blocker. He played less than 50% of the snaps offensively. Dallas Goedert's snap counts the last 4 years, 71, 77, 79, and 90. He's missed a couple stretches of games. He missed 5 games in 2020, and he missed 5 games again in 2022. But his production, 58 for 607 and 5. 46 for 524 and 3 in 11 games. 56 for 830 and 4. 55 for 702 and 3 in 12 games. If Dallas Goedert could slap together a full 17-game season, this is a player now that's probably pushing for 1,000 yards receiving. And he has become an all-encompassing player at the position. And he played at the same school, the same level of competition as Tucker Kraft, South Dakota State. Now, as I said, his athletic profile is a twinge more prolific. I do have those numbers up just from a comparison's sake. He has a couple 90th percentile tests. He was 98th percentile in his short shuttle. He was 92nd percentile in his 3-cone drill. So the agilities are the big difference between the two. Tucker Kraft, who's they're about the same size player. Dallas Goedert was like a 95th percentile athlete in his agility scores, and Tucker Kraft is a 65th percentile athlete. So that's the big divide between the two, and that's why I'm not comparing him to Dallas Goedert. But Dallas Goedert's career development and what he's become versus what he was and what the year one contributions look like is a good thing to point to for Tucker Kraft. Be excited if this guy's a Dolphin. I'm just not sure that you land Tucker Kraft on draft night on day 2 and you say, tight end room's fixed. You're probably going to have to add somebody else to the mix. We're going to do Zach Kuntz next here on Locked On Dolphins. That is our next show today, so make sure you plan accordingly. They appreciate you guys for making Locked On Dolphins your first listen of the day. You can find Locked On Dolphins on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Fins up, keep it locked in. right here on Locked On Dolphins. We'll be back later today to talk about Old Dominion tight end Zach Kuntz, who he is, where he fits, and where the Dolphins should consider drafting him in the 2023 NFL Draft. Peace.